So here's how I would draw a rope onto a surface in Maya and try and create a little knot at the end of it. I'm going to apply this rope to the back of this tank here that a student sent me for some help. At the moment, he's created a curve, but it's just hanging around loose in the wind over here, which I don't like all that much compared to the insane quality of the rest of this tank here. So you'll first need to download a picture of a knot. There's a link in the description below, and save this into the following place on your computer. Save it into Documents, Maya, Projects, Default, Source Images, sling it in there. Unless, of course, you're working in another project than default, that's great. But put it in source images, and we're going to need to bring that straight into Maya. So spacebar to your top view. If you can't see your top view or these 4 views for any reason, click on this button on the left. They'll all come back. Everything will be fine. This will also reset all of your views, so be careful. So spacebar back to my top view and go to View, Image Plane, Import Image, and choose the knot that you need and hit open, and it should appear in the middle of your scene. I'm going to move it over to where I need it now. You may want to go to Shading, X-ray, so that you can see through your geometry to the image plane. Just to confirm, the image plane is on the floor, which is fine. I'm going to resize this down to try and get it to about the right size. I'm trying to attach this knot to this hoop of geometry here to try and drag this down to about the right size. You can always scale it later on, but let's say that we're happy with that. And now we're going to trace this with a curve tool. So let's create a curve. Go to Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. I feel I have more control over the CV Curve Tool than any of the others, and start from the end of the rope like this and just do a dot to dot around here. So obviously at the moment the rope is completely flat and we're going to need to 3Dify it later on. So make sure you include enough points on the corners for the perspective of the rope as it comes up towards you, and just try and trace it as best as you can around like this. You can see here that there might be an issue. We can move these points later on. On parts of the rope that are flatter, you can click less points and you'll be fine. I'm going to go to about this point over here, and we'll come back to that later. So if you want to move any of these points, you have to go back to your selection tool, and you're going to want to select your curve here. To do this very accurately, move your mouse over the curve that you've just made and do right click, control vertex. If there's geometry anywhere nearby, it's going to click on the geometry instead, like this. So if try and do right click on the curve through this piece of geometry here, and I just do right click, it'll end up doing the vertex mode of this geometry, which is really annoying. So you may want to select your entire mesh, or at least the mesh that's nearby. I'm going to select the entire tank here. And I'm going to hold down shift and drag a box over my curve, so I deselect the curve that I've just drawn, so that's not part of the selection, and I'm going to add this tank to a new layer. So I'm going to move my mouse over here and do create a new layer and assign selected object, which I'm just going to call tank hole. So I'm actually going to change this empty box here to say T for template. So if you click on the empty box, it should immediately go to T, which means you can't click on it anymore, which is really useful. And in your 3D view, you just sort of see like a wireframe that you can't actually click on. However, the tiny curve that we just made is still clickable, onable, which is great. If you want to bring your tank back, don't worry, just click on the T, which changes it to an R, which you still can't click on, and then back to nothing, and then you can. So T, back to your top view, and you're now free to modify this and do right click, control vertex, move your points around like this. If you can't click on your curve for any reason, at the top of your Maya screen in this area here, if you can't see this area here, make sure you click on this vertical line to see it, and make sure the curves button is clicked on like that. Just a side note, unselecting the select objects doesn't actually help when you right click to select a vertex mode, so that doesn't work. We're now ready to 3Dify this rope here. I'm going to spacebar to my perspective view and hit F to focus, and with the W for move, and you'll see the pivot, and isn't here, it's actually in the middle of the grid, which is really annoying. So you can do this button here, which is center pivot, or you can do modify center pivot if you're in an older version of Maya, and you can move this up. So let's try and get a rough idea over what's what. So I'm going to do right click, control vertex, and I'm going to hit the letter B on the keyboard. This brings up soft select mode. Click on any vertex that you'd like to raise up now. I'm going to click on this vertex here. You should see that we only try and go to the move tool. It kind of selects all of the nearby parts of the curves like this to move up. What we want to do is just change the properties of soft select so that we only lift up the parts of the curve that we want. So if you double click in your mouse tool over here, and in soft selection, turn on fall off mode to surface. And then if you click on a point that you'd like to move up, do W for move, you'll see now that it only pulls up what's nearby. And if you hold B for Bravo on the keyboard and drag your mouse left or right, you can change the fall off of your brush. So if everything's yellow like this, you may need to zoom out really far and drag your mouse left and right, and a blue circle will come down like this over your geometry, and you can start lifting up the pieces of rope that you feel should be on top. And that should do for now. We can control this later on after we've put the geometry around it, and you'll see what is phasing through what. But let's say that we're happy with this for now. The next thing we're going to need to do is attach this to the rest of the tank. Attach this to a larger piece of rope to go onto the tank. So I'm going to move this rope up to the tank. I'm going to go to my layers area over here and turn that back off. You can then rotate the knot that you've just made to your liking. I'm just going to rotate mine like this so the bottom bit hangs down, and then go to, if I change this back to R for reference now and go back to control vertex, I'm going to just move the rope just so it hangs outside of this geometry here as tightly as possible. So now we're going to continue to draw this curve by clicking on the letter R on our layer again so that this all comes back. So now we're going to create a live surface to draw our rope onto. I'm going to click on this back bit here. So at the moment, when I use the CV curve tool and I try and just click on my geometry like this to add another curve, it paints through the geometry and onto the floor underneath like this. However, if you select the geometry, click on the magnet up here, and then do it again, this time you now paint directly onto the geometry as it's a live surface, and it even goes around corners like this, which is really, really handy. But that's not what I want. I want to continue this edge here. So very carefully move your mouse over to the curve and do shift right click and go to the add points tool. And if you continue to click, it now adds and extends the line that you've just made out onto the tank. So I'm just going to have this curve kind of just touching the top of this protruding bit there. It will then sag down and go up to this bit here. Don't worry if it phases through the geometry a little bit, we can change it later on, and it'll just sort of sit on top of there like that. I'm just going to modify a couple of these points to make this easier. I'm going to just put my layer back onto R for reference. I can now right click and control vertex, move these up and out. Now when you want to move them away, you'll see it gets stuck. You need to turn off your magnet so that your cables are free to go where you tell them. And all of these points, I was going to move them out away a bit like that. So we're only going to do half the rope because fortunately this is a symmetrical design. I'm going to mirror it later. Make sure that any hanging parts of your knot are actually hanging vertically down. So I'm going to go back to my soft select tool, which was in the control vertex. Drag B for soft select and do E for rotate, and just rotate this part of the rope just to hang down vertically like that. So create a cylinder. You want to create the cylinder in the nearby area. So if you go to create polygon primitives, turn on interactive creation, and then if you click on a new shape like this cylinder here and hold V for vertex and drag out on some existing geometry while holding V, it actually allows you to draw a shape on the geometry that's near you, as opposed to the middle of your grid or on the floor. So that's a really good tip for creating geometry where you want in 3D space. Move this down to the bottom of the rope, resize that down. We're going to have a lot of segments along this, so I'm going to reduce the divisions so that our poly count doesn't go crazy by going to the attribute editor, by going to polycylinder over here, reducing the subdivisions down to about 8. It will look quite low poly, but don't worry, we're going to smooth it later. Whoops, it's also really important to get the scale right. So I'm actually going to scale this down a bit beforehand. You won't be able to scale it down later. You might be able to make the rope thicker, but it's really difficult to make the rope thinner. So get that there. Go back to face mode. Make sure you select all the little faces on the top like I'm doing here. Hold shift, click on the blue line and go to extrude. When you hit extrude, you'll see that the rope automatically goes straight to the last point. It looks like it didn't work, but don't worry. Drag the divisions all the way to the right and you can see it is actually following the curve that you drew. Unfortunately, the division stops at 25, but don't worry, you can type in 100 and it's absolutely fine. And now have a little explore around the knot that you've done. It's not the best knot I've ever done, but it's better than nothing, and I'm sure you can do better. But at least I've taught you the principles here. There's a bit of a glitch which we need to fix. So you can see it's all super angular at the moment, which isn't something I want. So if you click on the rope and simply do mesh display, soften/harden edges. If that doesn't work, go to mesh display, soften edge, and you'll see it does actually still look smooth without actually adding any extra polygons to it. And we're going to now need to modify the knot a little bit. I'm not happy with the area here. Whatever you've done, I'm sure there'll be bits you're not happy with. So I'm going to add this rope to the layer in my channel box layer editor over here, or here, to the tank. So hold down right click and do add selected object. And now if you set this tank to R for reference, you can see it, but you can't click on it. However, if you go to shading and go to X-ray, you can now see through the geometry and see the curve inside, which is really handy. And now you can easily go to right click, control vertex, and I'm going to click on a point that I want, hit F to focus on it, and see what I can fix here. So if I pull that one down and out a bit, and you can use soft select and modify that to be bigger or smaller, depending on what you need. And when you're done, you can turn your tank layer back like this, and you can see the original piece of geometry wasn't moving, so you can either delete it or just manually move the starting geometry back to where you need. And you've done that piece of rope. If you want to connect it to the other side, if you have a symmetrical one, just modify that. Then you can click on the geometry, and now you're going to want to do delete history. Once you've deleted history, you'll be unable to modify the curve anymore to change the shape of your geometry, but I'm happy with this. I'm going to do edit, delete all by type history. This geometry is now locked in place, and now I can do mesh, mirror, options box, check my axis down here. I can say I want it to be on the X axis. The X is going that way, so it must be X plus. I'm going to use bounding box and do mirror like that. You can see it didn't join up perfectly in the middle. So to fix that, simply go to face mode, drag select all of these faces. So once you've got these selected, hold shift to deselect these and shift to deselect these, and it'll just leave you with the little ones in the middle, which you can then delete. And you're then free, if I just move that one over that way a bit, to bridge these up by going to edge mode, double click, shift, double click over there. Your bridge tool is here. Bridge them up together like that. If it's still a bit hard edges there, go to mesh display, soften edge. And if you want to move these farther apart, you can by going to edge mode, W for move, and just moving them over that way a bit like that. And the other side, you can see it's just phasing through a little bit here. So go to face mode, select the knot, make sure soft select is on and quite big, and simply move that way. And you're now left with a good looking knot on some geometry like this. You may have noticed that the camera was completely freaking out during this tutorial, which I'll show you how to fix in the video here, and check out my other quick tips and tricks in Maya here.